Hello, I'm Mishka, and this channel is the Helsinki Renaissance, where we will be talking about arts and culture, and hopefully the most Renaissance man-like manner with arts and culture may be discussed. At least that's the plan. Now, I thought that I'd try to do a video where I would rank what to me seem like 30 rather high-profile film franchises. Now, I can't say necessarily that these are the 30 film franchises that are most in the public consciousness, because I may have accidentally forgotten to include one film franchise for whatever reason, or B, I may not have seen movies in some franchises. So, for instance, I would have liked to include something like the Godzilla franchise, but I quite simply haven't seen almost any of the kind of key movies in that franchise, so it couldn't really be or I couldn't really consider my opinion about the Godzilla franchise because I've seen very few of the movies. So, you know, it would be, better advertisement for the video to say 30 of the most significant film franchises ranked, but these are more like 30 significant franchises that I've seen to some extent ranked. So we'll go with that. So anyway, I took out a paper and put some sort of a long list of contenders for this video. The Alien franchise, the Terminator franchise, the Harry Potter franchise, James Bond, Lord of the Rings, Fast and Furious, Transformers, Jurassic Park, and so on. I put a bunch of franchises and then tried to rank them with a mind towards both the quality and the quantity. So basically, I didn't. I tried to pick franchises that would have more than 3 entries, although perhaps there are a couple of 3 entries. But basically, I didn't want because to me it feels like it's difficult to compare a franchise that has 10 plus entries to something that only has 3, in that it becomes very difficult to contrast the two. So I tried to take ones that perhaps have too many sequels rather than too few. But anyway, I tried to have a mind towards both the quality and the quantity, and I don't know, hopefully my rankings make some amount of sense. Although, if you've seen my Oscar Best Picture winners ranked from best to worst, or Cannes Palme d'Or winners ranked from best to worst, sometimes my choices become controversial in their kind of quirky, subjective nature and so on. So again, with this, these are just my opinions, just my personal taste, and I'm rather, happy if some people, have different opinions and I end up taking the road less traveled or something. Although, at least as far as the beginning of my rankings, I think that's pretty well uncontroversial. It's people probably end up disagreeing what I leave as the bottom of my list, but anyway, that's for later on. But yeah, just as one thing to point out in that I did pick Marvel Cinematic Universe as one franchise. So basically from Iron Man onward. I picked that as a franchise because it does seem like it has this very cohesive unity to it, but I didn't pick DC Universe because it's just, for 2 reasons. it just feels like when DC releases stuff like Aquaman or Wonder Woman or something, they just feel like sort of standalone things, and when they try to tie them together with some Justice League stuff, it just doesn't really seem to work. So the DC universe doesn't seem to... It's just not functioning like a franchise as organically as MCU is. So what I did is that I have 3 superhero entries as contenders. I have the MCU, then I have this, even though Spider-Man is part of the MCU, but a fair amount of Spider-Man movies were released, independent of the MCU. So I'm sort of lumping all the Sam Raimi, Andrew Garfield films as their own Spider-Man thing. Maybe you can throw in the Tom Hardy Venom movie or something, whatever. But anyway, so I made Spider-Man its own franchise, and then I made Batman its own franchise, even though Batman is more like a cluster of franchises in that you should regard them as kind of like the Adam West, the Tim Burton, the Joel Schumacher, the Christopher Nolan, and then if you want to throw the Zack Snyder Batman versus Superman stuff in there as well. But anyway, like even though like the Spider-Man and Batman things aren't like proper franchises, it's more like the clusters of franchises, I still chose to regard them as like a franchise because a fair amount of the audience does, and then the DC stuff, I didn't include anything else. So that is what it is. And that's my choices for the 30 films ranked. Aren't perfect, but we're going with this, and it is what it is again. But anyway, I don't know whether I should do what I did with my best picture video ranked from best to worst or personal favorite to least favorite. Whether I should just read the list first in order and then defend my choices afterwards from the criticism that is coming. But, so as to not bury the lead, which is something that I perhaps have a tendency to do, I'll read the list first now and then defend my choices afterwards. So anyway, number 1, I put the James Bond franchise. Number 2, Star Wars. Number 3, Batman. Number 4, Indiana Jones. Number 5, Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit films. Number 5, Hammer Studios Dracula series. Number 6, the Hammer Dracula was number 6. Then 7, MCU. Then the Alien franchise, the Jason Bourne franchise, the Rocky franchise, the Matrix, Jurassic Park, Toy Story, Austin Powers, the Terminator franchise, Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, Mission Impossible, Police Academy, Star Trek, Spider-Man, Die Hard, Nightmare on Elm Street, Men in Black, Lethal Weapon, Harry Potter, X-Men, Rambo, Fast and the Furious, Transformers, and Twilight. Now, I didn't read all the numbers, but anyway, it's indicative of where films were positioned later on. And, if the first thing to point out is why James Bond at number 1. Well, to me it's fairly simple. Basically, the sheer quantity of entries in the James Bond franchise, I think makes it pretty impossible to beat from the number 1 spot. In that, if basically any franchise is lucky to have like 5 quality entries, well, the Bond franchise, I feel like it's so strong that I think that there are individual Bond actors who have at least 5 quality entries. So obviously all of the Bond actors combined can match 5 and so on. So basically the sheer quantity of entries in the Bond franchise basically make it so that it has to be 1. So it wins the quantity game. And then as far as the quality is concerned, obviously that's a very subjective thing, but I am, I was watching a lot of Bond films on VHS tapes when I was a kid. So those are long-time favorites for me. Mainly the Roger Moore films. I didn't have a complete set of the Bond films when I was young, but I had maybe 70% of them. I do have a lot of nostalgia and a lot of good feelings towards the Bond films. And just to make criticism of its placement at number 1, absolutely impossible as far as its effectiveness would be concerned, in that the reason why I can't really consider anything dislodging it from the number 1 spot is because a lot of the Bond films that are regarded as like franchise low points, I'm more accepting of them than others tend to be. So when some would say that there are some horrendously aged decisions taken in some of those earlier films, that stuff only really functions as a devastating criticism if you treat the Bond films as dramas. But if you think of them as this kind of like action comedies, which is what they tended to be before they tried to edge towards, a more serious-minded position throughout the Pierce Brosnan and Daniel Craig era. I just, all of the, rocket launchers in wristwatch type stuff. A lot of stuff that would seem childish to some more serious-minded viewers, like the Bond films aren't meant to be some kind of next level geopolitical treatises. It's just, they are pretty light-hearted action fare, and as such, I think that the franchise has way more successful than unsuccessful entries. Now, obviously, the quality varies rather wildly from the best to the worst entry, but it's to be expected. But anyway, James Bond at number 1, I would say that it's number 1 with a fairly wide margin. Now, the Star Wars at number 2, I basically think that the make or break point for Star Wars' positioning is how you feel about the prequels. Because like I said about some of the supposedly weaker entries in the Bond franchise, I feel like if the prequels are weak entries in some people's mind, that might sink the kind of median score to the Star Wars franchise, that somebody might feel like the original trilogy are the only good entries and everything else would be bad according to them. But I think that the prequels have this kind of a campy charm to them, in that they assuredly did not succeed in exactly the way that George Lucas planned them to succeed, but I think that they sort of managed to, I feel like the Star Wars prequels do just enough that there's a basic level entertainment when you combine the kind of intended success of the production values and John Williams score and getting some amount of good actors and so on. When you combine the kind of intended successes with what might be the unintended successes of all of the laugh out loud funny lines that perhaps weren't meant to be funny, but have been turned into memes later on and so on. So, my tolerance of the Star Wars prequels make it kind of a no-brainer to put Star Wars at number 2, basically on the strength of the original trilogy, but then not letting some of the other films drag it down too much. So, I couldn't really consider anything other than Star Wars at number 2, even though the franchise assuredly is not trending in the right direction. But then again, that's the same with basically every still currently active franchise, in that the next entry in a given franchise is likely to be a contender for the worst entry, but that's how it is with sequels. They just play out a franchise until the audience starts hating it. So it is what it is. But anyway, Star Wars at 2, I feel like has to be made. Now, the 3 films that come after, the 3 franchises that come after, it is kind of a 3-way tie between Batman, Indiana Jones, and the Lord of the Rings, Hobbit, Middle Earth universe or whatever. I put Batman at 3. I didn't feel great about it, but I feel like it's my honest opinion. In that, basically, my Batman-related opinions are kind of strange in that I perhaps have a higher tolerance for Batman Forever and Batman and Robin than most people. Now, assuredly, those are not good movies. But like with prequels, they have this kind of hokey charm to them where, some of the line delivery, some of the production values, there's such a bizarre quality to them, like Arnold Schwarzenegger saying "eyes to see you" type stuff. In that, if those are like bad entries, I can live with those kind of bad franchise, stumblings better than with some other kind of bad franchise moments. And basically, why I put Batman ultimately at 3 is because if those low points are as bad as it gets, I'd rather take those than, say, Indiana Jones' Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which I feel like is just tedious in how it's bad rather than campily entertaining. So, again, it might be a controversial decision, but I honestly do think that Star Wars prequels are better movies than Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of Crystal Skull, which is not a movie that I completely hate, but it is a pretty bad misfire. And again, it's just like the difference is that Star Wars prequels can be at times unintentionally funny, something like Batman and Robin, like whether it's intentionally or unintentionally funny, that I would call it unintentionally funny. But yeah, like when contrasting some of those low points, I think that the Batman franchise's low points just sort of seem slightly better. Mainly why I think that I feel somewhat not great about putting Batman at 3 is because Christopher Nolan's Batman movies, I think, have sort of eclipsed the Tim Burton Batmans as like what people mainly feel like watching, at least I think. But I actually only like one of the 3 Christopher Nolan movies, in that I think Batman Begins, I'm sort of fine with the first half of the movie, but then the second half of the movie, I think the David S. Goyer-ness of it all just takes it somewhere where I'm not necessarily the biggest fan. And then Dark Knight Rises is another movie where I basically like half of it, but then the other half, it's not really, again, like, I actually kind of dislike Dark Knight Rises, even though it has sequences that I do like, but I just think that it's sort of, it's not what I'd call a great ending to a trilogy, but I'm sort of okay with it, and putting the Batman franchises at 3 sort of seems like where I have to put them because of the kind of multiple high points, if you want to call it, in that I quite like the Tim Burton Batman movies. For instance, I like the Adam West Batman and so on. So there's a lot to like, I feel like. Now, Indiana Jones at 4, it's sort of as low as it can be in that obviously the first 3 movies are all, I think, quite great pieces of entertainment, even though Temple of Doom is not, like, Temple of Doom has a lot of stuff that I'm not the biggest fan of, but I mean, if that's like a low point, then that's basically a better low point than anything else. I realized that other people like Temple of Doom more than I do. I was never a fan of it, but you know, it has something to it, but I just think that it sort of looks kind of awkward next to the first and the third one, which sort of seem like the adventure mode is better. But anyway, Indiana Jones at 4, you know, it's probably as low as it can be. And then Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit at 5, you know, I'm probably in kind of a minority, but I didn't hate the Hobbit movies that much. Like, yes, some of the CGI stuff reaches kind of Star Wars prequel levels of well, cringe, I guess, in that some of the CGI-ness just makes it look like some sort of a cartoon, I guess, and you know, it's kind of pointlessly drawn out, and all of the attempts at making it more epic, you know, five armies simultaneously battling stuff, Legolas doing flips and shit, like, you know, I mean, I understand the criticism against the Hobbit movies, but still at the same time, I just didn't hate those movies that much. I thought they were just kind of slight but bearable. And obviously the Lord of the Rings trilogy itself, it's quite a good movie, or quite a great trilogy, obviously. Even though I do have some issues with Return of the King. But anyway, you know, Lord of the Rings Hobbit at 5, you know, seems pretty, I don't know, standard, I guess. I think it has to be a consensus top 5 franchise still, even though the Hobbits would drag it down for some people. But yeah, then I don't know if the Hammer and Dracula stuff at number 6, I don't know how much I need to explain that, in that I think it's actually a wildly uneven franchise, and you know, Hammer did practice this kind of shameless milking of a cash cow with the franchises, in that whenever they were low on money, they would turn to a completely gratuitous and cheap and unnecessary sequel to one of their biggest hits, and they would sort of dupe the audience into approving of them, whether or not Christopher Lee or Peter Cushing were involved, or sometimes when they were involved, whether they just had a couple of scenes sort of at the edge of the situation. But anyway, Hammer's Dracula I find a wildly uneven franchise, but then, you know, when Terence Fisher is on board, the kind of franchise high points are pretty high. Now, you know, even including the Hammer's Dracula film franchise might seem like, you know, I feel like lots of people wouldn't have taken it as a contender, but I wanted to take a couple of older franchises just to sort of create this kind of historical contrast to if I had tried to take even more old franchises, sort of how they would stack up against some of these newer ones. But But anyway, I think that Hammer's Frankenstein franchise actually is slightly stronger than the Dracula one, but the Dracula one is better known. And I don't know whether it's worth saying or not, but obviously, well, I consider those Terence Fisher Dracula movies the best, best in its genre or whatever. So, you know, 6 assuredly is as high as I can rank them. All of the other ones would be way at the bottom of the list, but that's a different story. But anyway, I mainly just picked a Hammer franchise to sort of represent all older films and to see where they would stack up. Then MCU at 7. I don't know if I need to say much about it. I mean, I've actually done a video where I rank MCU movies from my favorite to least favorite. Perhaps there were some controversial choices, but if you watch that video, you see that I basically like most of them, with a couple of exceptions, like Ant-Man and the Wasp and Iron Man 2. One of the controversial selections was that I didn't hate Thor 2. Apparently everyone else did. But I like most MCU movies. I feel like there's kind of an inconsequential quality to some of the movies in the franchise, in that if you compare the greater successes like Infinity War to something like, I don't know, the first Thor movie. The first Thor movie obviously looks rather small and just kind of minor chapter or something, but I think that there's a decent amount of charm to the MCU, so perhaps some would have ranked it higher, but to me it's more like I'm pretty okay with basically everything in the MCU. I just think that the kind of qualitative level is a bit flat because they don't really employ what I'd consider top tier directors, and then obviously, a film can only be so highly ranked. But basically, the quantity of good films and the overall decent quality, I think that around number 7 is sort of, I don't know, makes sense to me. But some might disagree. Now, number 8, the Alien franchise, it's Alien franchise, I think more than anything else, it's sort of started suffering from the sheer quantity of unnecessary sequels that absolutely nobody asks, but they just keep coming. And obviously the franchise has more bad sequels than good entries at this point. But I think that even if you count something like Alien versus Predator type entries, I don't think the bad Alien sequels are that awful. Like, obviously they aren't good, but as far as bad sequels are concerned, I'm sort of more okay with those than, say, some of the other things that shall be named later in this video. So that, I think that the Alien franchise, like the first 2 films being so good, they sort of carry the shabbiness of everything that follows, and then I have to put it decently high because, it has good production values. It's just marred by kind of hollow decision making later on. But, I think among the better flawed franchises at this point. Now, Jason Bourne at number 9. I think that the reason why I ranked it so much higher than some others, probably higher than what a fair amount of people do, is because I actually quite like the Bourne Legacy and the Jason Bourne films, in that the 4th and 5th entry in the franchise. I know a lot of people don't like the Bourne Legacy, for instance, with Edward Norton and Jeremy Renner. I think it's a great film, actually. So I'm definitely in a minority. Now, I think that the reason why I don't put the Bourne franchises higher, although 9 out of 30 is quite high in my book, but the reason why I don't put it higher is because I think that there's kind of it's a franchise that has sort of started walking in circles. So putting it any higher would kind of be an insult to individuals like Ridley Scott or whatever, who, like the first Alien is a great movie and so on. So 9 is positively as high as I can go, but I basically like all of the entries in the Jason Bourne franchise, and that's probably putting me in a minority with it, but it is what it is. Now, number 10, Rocky. Rocky assuredly is not a franchise where I like all the entries. In fact, I probably dislike more of the if you count the Creed films, and I don't even know how many entries the Rocky franchise has, but I think it has more bad entries than good entries. But I think that again, with some of the not great entries, they're sort of basically watchable, and so I don't think that it's just kind of unfortunate just how shabby the Rocky franchise has gotten, in that the quality is nothing but stagnant at this point, and obviously has been for quite a while. But I think that those are decent enough as the movies, and then what I'd consider the franchise high points I apparently like enough that I think all in all, like, if there's a Rocky movie on TV, I just find it's just sort of so generally watchable that I can put it in the top 10, just barely. So anyway, The Matrix at 11, I don't know whether people consider it too high or too low, because it's kind of an odd, like, The Matrix has fallen from pop culture, sort of like, I mean, it used to be kind of a big deal, and now people barely notice it, so I don't know what to make of it. But again, I'm probably kind of in a strange minority in that I quite like the two Matrix sequels, Reloaded and Revolutions. And then if you count the Animatrix stuff, I'm sort of okay with them. So I basically do like all of the Matrix films. It's just, I don't know. Like, I think the production values are fine. I don't mind some of the decisions taken in the sequels or whatever, but it's not something that, the passion for it has waned for me and for everyone else. It's difficult to say why, but obviously I put it higher on the list rather than lower, so I don't have much negative to say about it, but, those are my thoughts. Now, Jurassic Park at 12, it's counting the Chris Pratt Jurassic World stuff. I don't know whether people think that this is too high, but basically, again, I think that the Jurassic World films are pretty bad, but as far as bad entries in franchises, I think that those are more watchable bad entries than some of the other ones, which we'll mention shortly. So then it's just sort of the two Spielberg directed first films. It's kind of like the Alien franchise in that the Spielberg entries need to sort of drag the rest of it into some kind of levels of acceptability. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I can see the argument why some people say that it would be too high, but I quite like I quite like half of the franchise, let's say, and then I can tolerate the other half, so it is what it is. Now, Toy Story at 13, I feel like some people think that it's too low. The problem for me is that I don't hate any of the movies in the franchise. The problem is that those aren't like the biggest personal favorites for me. So even though the Toy Story franchise assuredly has a better medium quality to do it than the Jurassic Park, the problem is that my favorite moments in either a Jurassic Park franchise or Toy Story, like, my favorite moments are all in the Spielberg Jurassic Parks, versus I'm just kind of okay on the kind of high points of the Toy Story franchise. So even though the quality control is good, it's just, not the biggest personal favorites. I understand that others would rank it rather higher. So I just sort of put it there representing some CGI animation or something just to see how it would stack up against some of the live action stuff. So others would have it higher, but you know, their lists are different anyway, so it is what it is. Now, Austin Powers at 14, like I'm sure other people wouldn't have even considered ranking the Austin Powers, but basically, I just sort of wanted to show that there are certain comedy franchises as well, and you know, like I like all of the three Austin Powers movies. Perhaps it should be higher on the list. The problem is, again, in that it is kind of it is a franchise that tries to get away effectively repeating similar type of jokes, you know, 3 different times. And so it would seem like insulting to some of the slightly more inventive you know, films that have been mentioned, in that even though I think that the medium quality with the Austin Powers franchise is rather high, it's just that you know, the lack of quality and certain kind of repetitiousness, I think, you know, you can't put it too high. But anyway, I just sort of wanted to signal that you know, there are these kind of comedy franchises, and I think some of them stack up rather well with this situation, but yeah, you know, I think 14 maybe seems fair or not, I don't know. But then the Terminator at 15. Now, somebody might say that they don't agree with this kind of idea that Alien and Jurassic Park are a bit higher, but they all have the same situation in that 2 good first entries and then progressively worse sequels piled on top of them. But the problem, I feel like the problem is that when the Terminator franchise has bad movies, they just, like, I think that the bad movies in the Terminator franchises are just kind of worthless and actively annoying, whereas Alien franchise, when it has bad movies, I just sort of shrug my shoulders at them and don't mind them too much. Now, some people can disagree, but it's just how I feel, and that I think that I just think Alien and Aliens are better than Terminator and Terminator 2, and then, you know, if the bad sequels in Alien are better than bad sequels in Terminator, it sort of forces me to place them where they are, so that's my rationale. Pirates of the Caribbean at 16. Again, this is a semi-unpopular opinion, but I never really hated the Gore Verbinski directed Pirates of the Caribbean. Like, lots of people thought that the CGI stuff was kind of childish. They thought that the plots were convoluted. They thought that there was this slightly tedious po-faced quality to some of the posturing in it. None of that stuff really bothered me. I thought that the Gore Verbinski Pirates trilogy was good, but then the problem is that everything that has come afterwards has been just worthless. It's a harsh word to use, but I mean, those sequels then have been probably bad, and I won't even attempt to defend them, but you know, it's sort of middle of the list fair, because I genuinely do like the Verbinski. Like, I think that Gore Verbinski can be a bit underrated as a director. You know, he doesn't have a lot of champions for him, but you know, I think that when you look at how badly some of the Rob Marshall and company did with the Pirates sequels, you saw how Gore Verbinski was actually doing quite a good job at injecting certain kind of wit and vivacity to the proceedings, which entirely evaporated, and everything could evaporate the minute Gore Verbinski left. But perhaps some people still think that 16 is way too high for the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. I mean, that's fine, but again, it's just sort of testimony to me maybe regarding the first 3 entries more highly than everyone else then. Now, the Mission Impossible franchise at 17, I would like to have it higher, but I honestly think that the Mission Impossible franchise I regard it somewhat similarly as the MCU, in that all of those movies are good enough. Like, I don't mind them that much. The problem is that I feel like there's ultimately a fairly inconsequential quality to a lot of those movies, in that, I would say that I think that the first Mission Impossible by Brian De Palma is obviously the best one, but then when it comes to which are the next two best, well, maybe I don't know, Ghost Protocol, Rogue Nation, something, I don't know. I think that the second and third Mission Impossible movies are pretty bad. The Brad Bird directed fourth one is just kind of okay, and then, I don't know. Like, it's not the strongest overall franchise, but it's also not the weakest franchise in that, it's a pretty watchable, though not necessarily the most epic franchise, but sort of middle of the list seems sort of where it belongs to me. But anyway, I couldn't place it any higher or lower. Now, Police Academy at 18, obviously, it's a franchise that you either like or loathe, and me putting it sort of in the middle of the list signifies that I like it more than I hate it. But like with Austin Powers, for instance, it just became so repetitious that you can't reward it too much. But anyway, I do like I don't know, I watched those movies a lot as a kid. I am fine with some of the earlier entries in the series. Then obviously with the fifth one, I think that they already started knowing that they started pushing their luck with the audience. And when even Steve Guttenberg says that he's too good for this, then you know that the franchise has taken a step down. But anyway, I'm kind of okay with the Police Academy films. Now, Star Trek at number 19, that was a tough franchise to position, although you could count it as kind of 3 franchises in that the William Shatner, who's the Jean-Luc Picard actor? Anyway, whoever that guy whose name escapes me right now is, and then the Chris Pine. I don't care about the Picard and Chris Pine era Star Trek films that much, although I think some of those J.J. Abrams movies, they're decent enough on their own terms. I just think that they are kind of a betrayal of the spirit of Star Trek in being kind of very basic action films. But anyway, I think that the Star Trek franchise has kind of decent flat quality to it. Just the kind of problem is that if Wrath of Khan is the only really highly regarded film, it just means like a franchise with like 10 entries with 1 winner and like 5 decent ones and 4 not great ones. It's kind of a dubious batting average, but yeah, I ranked it ahead of some franchises, so I don't entirely dislike it. Now, Spider-Man at 20, obviously it's lower on the list rather than higher. I don't know what to say. Like, the Andrew Garfield films are bad. I dislike those recent Marvel Spider-Man films. I think that they're both bad. I think that the Sam Raimi, out of the 3 films, at best, it's like 2 out of 3. And I feel like, well, I don't know. Like, I would say that the first 2 Spider-Man films are, good, and then the third one, not good. But yeah, obviously, the Spider-Man franchise has more entries that I dislike than I like, and I'm not that over the moon about the first 2 ones, so that's why it's lower down the list. But, when the franchise gets it right. I mean, I ranked it ahead of, say, the Die Hard or the Men in Black franchises because, I mean, obviously the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films are better when they get it right, but, I don't think the franchise gets it right very often. Then, I'll say of Die Hard that I'm sort of okay with the first three and then it completely falls off the rails. But with the first three, I have this kind of I can take it or leave it quality to it, which is why it's like lower than the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. In that, even though kind of structurally they are similar, but I'm just not the biggest fan of the first three Die Hard. Like I'm okay with all of them. I'm okay watching all of them. They just aren't personal favorites, I guess. Nightmare on Elm Street at 22. Again, some of the problems, like with the police academy or whatever, it's just or the Rocky movies and Nightmare on Elm Street movies. I think that those franchises sort of have a comparable situation in that it just became so repetitious that you can reward it too much, but it's like kind of passable. Men in Black, like it was kind of a franchise built around Will Smith's charisma, but it's just it's kind of faded from relevance. But those are kind of semi-watchable movies. Lethal Weapon at 24. I like the I'm okay with the first one. I like the second one. Third and fourth are pretty bad. I don't know if they've remade it, but if they have, I haven't seen it. But I'm sure it's awful if it exists. But anyway, Lethal Weapon, I like Shane Black a lot as a writer, but I don't know. I like Richard Donner as a director, but those are just kind of passable movies. Harry Potter at 25 is rather low as far as some young people who actually like those movies. Everyone else probably thinks that they are sort of where they belong. The X-Men series at 25, it's just it's kind of like the Terminator franchise, except the first two Terminator are great films versus the first two X-Men are okay films, but like it's just it's all the time traveling and different plot lines and different actors playing the same characters and whatever. It just became a mess that nobody particularly cares to salvage. But some of the X-Men films have okay moments, so it is what it is. Rambo then at 28. I greatly like the first one. I don't overtly care about the sequels, although you can just barely, I guess, watch them. Like, the Rambo sequels are a total betrayal of the first one, which, again, the Dead God Chef film. I think that the first Rambo has its own kind of integrity to it, and then obviously the sequels just became kind of really bad samples of popcorn fodder. Again, like if there are newer Rambo films, like is there a Rambo 4 and Rambo 4? Like I haven't even watched them. I just assume that they're bad. But yeah, like one winner and then the rest are the opposite of winners. So lower down the list. Then the bottom three of Fast and the Furious, Transformers, and Twilight. I feel like a fair amount of people would put those lower down the list if they are kind of slightly more serious film buffs. And I realize that some people like Fast and the Furious movies, some people like Transformers. I don't know. I don't hate some of the entries in some of those franchises. The problem is that I just sort of can't take or leave the high points, and then the low points are really low. But like if I have to choose between Fast and the Furious or Transformers movies, I guess I think Fast and the Furious is a slightly better franchise. Now, when looking at this full list, I I think that some franchises like the Shrek movies, like maybe I could have tried to, have a second CGI animation thing. But like, if I tried to, I think that I probably would have put the Shrek franchise like between the Terminator franchise and Pirates of the Caribbean franchise at around 16. So in case anybody cares. And I don't know if I forgot some major franchises, but yeah, this is sort of how I look at these things, and yeah, I don't know whether I should do a James Bond, personal favorite rankings video like I did with the Marvel Cinematic Universe one. But because there are a fair amount of those kinds of videos on YouTube already, it's not particularly inviting me to do so. And because my James Bond rankings are so quirky as far as everyone else is concerned, perhaps I shouldn't do. But yeah, I just thought that this would be kind of an interesting sort of mini explanation of what some of my attitudes towards contemporary cinema are, and how I view some of these franchises. And that, I recently watched a William Friedkin interview where he talked about how the 77 Star Wars changed everything for the new American cinema generation, because it just moved Hollywood into this kind of franchise mode, which is obviously not where people like William Friedkin wanted it to go. But yeah, in this franchise era Hollywood, this is sort of, I feel like, a good general introduction to how I view some of those franchises. But anyway, if some people think that I was terribly wrong in some of my rankings, they can tell me in the comments, and if I forgot some franchise that shouldn't have been forgotten, then they can tell me that in the comments as well. But anyway, I think that was all for this video. Thank you for watching. Bye bye for now.